Shalom and welcome everyone. This is Zen Garcia, your host, here for another awesome episode of Ask Me Anything with author Gary Wayne. Gary, are you with us?
I am, and so excited to be back with you tonight, and hopefully the audience has a lot of questions that they can get in through the chat, and we'll try and get through the other questions, and yeah, it should be a lot of fun.
Absolutely. We're excited to get started, and we definitely have some awesome questions that are on the list for tonight, but for everybody that's following on the YouTube live chat, we will have some time, hopefully at the end of the episode, where we'll take live questions from you all, and Gary will do his best to give you a super thorough answer like he normally does. So, hey Sam. Sam said, love your work, Gary Wayne. We appreciate all of your support and everyone. We really pray that you'll have an awesome study tonight, and that all of the study that Gary has done in his life will come to bear fruit for all of us, and that we'll just learn and grow together. Hey Matt, Be Good Bear, welcome everybody. Glad to see you all joining us tonight. I am working with 2 screens tonight. This is my first time with 2 screens, and we're doing the videos. We got everything running. So please bear with me if we have any technical difficulties. We'll do our best to ensure that you have an awesome, smooth stream and that the show turns out really well. But as always, I just want to let everyone know exactly where they can find Gary's book and how they can support him. So Gary, could you please let everyone know?
I'm sorry, you're breaking up. I didn't catch that.
Sorry about that. All right, I was just
that's okay.
I was just going to ask, where can people find your book and how can they support you?
That's much better, yes. So you can find my book quite easily. Easiest and fastest way is go to my website at www.genesis6conspiracy.com. That's Genesis 6 with the number 6conspiracy.com. And on there you can get a signed copy if you would like to go that route. And you can also link from my website to Amazon.com, Amazon.ca, and also to BarnesandNoble.com, and to the Kindle format if you want a digital copy. It's distributed by Bookmasters, so if it's not on your local bookstore's shelves, they can order it from Bookmasters and get it in. You can support your local bookstores, and in Canada it's available on Indigo and Chapter stores, and so it's also available on most online bookstores. So lots of ways to get it, and if you wanted to check out what the book was all about, on the website, Genesis6conspiracy.com, I have a generous excerpt of all 98 chapters so you can get a good feel for it and see whether or not it's a book that's for you or not.
So only 98 chapters? That's it? I'm just kidding. That seems like a really great offer. And please, everybody that's joining us tonight, support Gary. Check out his book. I know that you'll be blessed by the awesome research and work that he presents there. But for this show, we'll go ahead and we'll just get started with a quick prayer, and then we'll move straight into the questions. Oh, wow, your camera just cleared up very well, so I think that our connection is strengthening up, and prayerfully it'll stay strong for the next couple hours. So if you will, everyone, please bow your heads. We'll just pray real quick. Father Yah, we just humble ourselves before you. We thank you so much for the opportunity that we have to join together as an ecclesia, as a family, as a fellowship of people who are seeking after you with their whole hearts, with everything that we have, Father. And we pray that tonight that you will specifically be with Gary, bless him, give him your Holy Spirit, Father. Let him have understanding and wisdom and knowledge and a clear mind to be able to present the ideas and the concepts that you have revealed to him, to answer the questions of all of the listeners from around the earth, Father. We just humble ourselves before you and ask that you would work through us in this time. We praise you in the name of the Messiah, Yahusha. Amen. All right, so we will go ahead and get to the first question. I think there is a little bit of a delay, so for everybody that is following along on the stream, Please just be patient with us tonight. Gary is all the way up in the cold land of Canada, and I'm all the way down here in Georgia. So there might be a couple seconds, but it's definitely not as far as traveling by horse with a message. All right, the first question is, who were Egyptians with long skulls?
Yeah, good question. And there's so many reliefs and artifacts and statues and things that are in museums where they have these elongated skulls, and a lot of them are covered up by these large sort of hats, and I think that was just part of the skulls as visible. And the other thing that is closely corresponds with these descriptions and with the pictures and the reliefs of these elongated skulls with kings like Akhenaten and others, and Queens Nefertiti and others. They also tend to have a long neck. And I think that helps us understand where they likely are derived from or connected to or related to, no matter how you come back in terms of how you have these Nephilim type creatures that are on the thrones in Egypt. And noting Egypt is one of those primordial civilizations that was before the flood, that's recorded in non-Christian accounts all around the world. And of course, the first or second pillar, depending on how you want to look at it, after Babel, after the flood. So you have Mesopotamia and you have Egypt. And so there's obviously going to be connections in there as well. So getting into where I think they would come from, I would start looking at those physical traits and recognizing them as being Nephilim creatures, and after the flood, Rephaim creatures, who are the giants. And when we look at a couple of sets of people that come out of the land of the covenant, particularly in the time of Exodus and the time of Abraham, we have Rephaim nations and we have Anakim nations. And in Deuteronomy 2, it says the Anakim are Rephaim. So it's a different branch or a different vernacular name, but essentially the same individuals. And the Anakim were known to have, and if you take that back to Hebrew, to Anarchy as the plural format of Anak, both of those words, as you take that back to Hebrew, are defined as not only as a tribe of giants but as long-necked. And so I think there's a good case here for them, the Egyptian kings being very much related to the Anakim and Rephaim kings. And King Og, who was Rephaim, as he's recorded as the last of the Rephaim, or probably last of the first generation, because I tend to fall into a second incursion understanding of how they show up after the flood, and would be the last of that sort of original sort of offspring on that incursion. I do recognize there's other ways, but that's where I fall. But getting back to the name Og, as you take that back to Hebrew, again, it goes back to long-necked. And again, I think if we look at King Og and his brother Sihon, those were kings, just as the giants were kings all over the early post-Diluvian world, just as they were before the flood. So when we look at that sort of common sort of history and legacy and appearance, and we also understand that they dominated and usurped all of the kingships after the flood, then I think we can probably connect them back as being from the same race and the same Nephilim and the Rephaim nation that are also, Anakim and Horim and Avim and all the other different vernacular names that are for the Rephaim. And when we look at those two pillars of civilization after the flood, I mentioned Mesopotamia and Egypt. The other one in Mesopotamia, that's where Nimrod was. And so this would be the people that Nimrod would have intermarried with. And just as there would be some of that intermarrying going on in some occasions so that they could help reproduce and not develop blood diseases, I think Nimrod is very much that first sort of intersection of him intermarrying into the Eastern giants. And there's also, if you get into like Lawrence Gardner and a lot of the Gnostic thought is that they believe that Nimrod's descendants usurped the Egyptian kingship shortly after in about the third generation. Some say second generation, depending on which researcher that you're looking at. And what's important about that is that when I mentioned that Nimrod intermarries right after Babel. He's a Gibborim. He's a mighty one, and he becomes a Gibborim, and that is generally used to describe Nephilim, but it can be used to describe, the strength of God. It can be described angels. It's used to describe the mighty men of David who weren't Nephilim, although you can make a case for some of them, like Uriah the Hittite, who is a part of the mighty men that would be perhaps Rephaim as well. But for the most part, you have to be careful on how you apply that. What we do know is he was the son of Cush, and that he certainly ruled and acted like a mighty one for sure. And whether or not he was able to change his DNA or whatever the other speculation is as to how he became more like a giant, as a lot of people speculate, no, that is, possible, but it is speculation. But what we do know is Nimrod, he starts the dynasties in the Mesopotamia region, just as Akkad is the land of Nimrod. And these are where all the metallic dynasties are going to come out of, whether it's Assyria, whether or not it's Babylon, whether or not it's Persia, on and on and on with the dynasties in Daniel and described in Revelations. And very important to understand those connections. And so when we look at Nimrod intermarrying with these peoples, that's generally understood in two different sort of terms as to who these giants were from the Eastern aspect. And that's the Mary Anu, or the Aryans of the polytheist version, where they descend into the Mesopotamian region and they help spawn the Mitanni dynasty and the Kassite dynasty and, the Hittite Empire and also the Persian dynasty. And they also continue to migrate and intermix with the Amalekim, which is another brand of the Rephaim, and also the Horim, and also the Egyptian kingship. So that's another source where you get that sort of cross blood of those giants in. Where I would make that connection then with the Mary Anu, or the Aryans, is that we get an interesting set of people that are listed in Genesis 15 called the Cadmonites, and they're also listed with the other two K nations, the Kenizzites and the Kenites, which are also kind of an inexplicable story. And it's interesting that you got three nations called KKK there that have this relationship with giants that is, a name that formed a secret society of the Aryans, as they're known today, the KKK. And all imagery is about giants and dragons and things like that. So, but again, that's another rabbit hole. But these Cadmonites, they are known, as you take that back to Hebrew, as defined as the Eastern people. And these are part of the giants that were reigning over the promised land before the Israelites took the land of the covenant at the time of the Exodus. And so I think these are the people, the Cadmonites, are probably the same as the Mary Anu or the Aryans. And Nimrod would have married into the Cadmonites, is my speculation and research shows. And out of that, you get these other dynasties, including the Mitanni dynasty that interbred with the Egyptian dynasties, as well as the Kassites. And you get all of the other metallic dynasties, or the beast dynasties, out of Daniel's prophecies coming out of that same sort of root. So long and short of it is I think those are the elongated Nephilim, Rephaim skulls that belong to the same set of people, and that civilization and dynasty was usurped as well and reigned over by those giants and their descendants of giants, as it comes down in the visible, tangible accounts with, and that we still have today with people like Akhenaten and King Tut and Nefertiti and all of the Amarna dynasty and many others as well. But I think that's where I would trace it back to.
All right. Thank you for that very thorough and extensive answer. It's definitely so interesting. Joy and I were doing some traveling in 2017, 2018 around the world, and we got to go to the British Museum and a few museums in Paris and Italy, and along the way, they had all of these sculptures of Nefertiti, and even some of these ancient ones that were unclassified, they all had these long skulls, and it was just so interesting to see that. But I will go ahead and get the next question pulled up onto the screen. My computer is running a little bit slower because we're trying to do so many things, but here it is. It's from Linda, and she says, what are your thoughts on being filled with the Spirit? My church I came from, if you don't speak in tongues, you are not saved. That's a great question.
Yeah, so it is. And a lot of people are concerned about whether or not the Spirit is in them and or they're saved. So I think for people who may not be familiar with a verse that is, I think, important to read, that would be 1 Corinthians in chapter 12, from verse 1 on, and it talks about the spiritual gifts, and that includes not only of speaking in tongues and interpreting, that language as a separate gift, but also prophecy and wisdom and knowledge and faith and miracles and being in government, and also gifts of the Spirit. And one of the biggest ones in there for me is just the gift of faith. And so what I would say to that is there are many gifts, and they come in all different shapes and sizes and are all given out as God wants them to be given out. And if you're following in the path of God, that gift will become clear in terms of what your mission is or what your special talent might. But if you're following God and letting him be your guide, he'll bless you and he'll provide the gifts. But if you don't have anything that would be one of those main gifts, certainly don't think that you're not saved. Those are not given out to everybody. We're not told in terms of how they're dispersed scripturally, but don't be thinking that just because you don't speak in tongues that you're not saved. And I would say, this as well, is that if you do hear somebody speaking in tongues or doing any of these other gifts, you have to discern and make sure that they're doing it through God. And that it's to not to enamor the person that's doing it, but to enamor God and to worship God and to elevate God and to show God's magnificence. So how that's applied is part of the discernment, and also asking the Spirit in terms of some of these gifts that you're coming on, are they from God? And if you are discerning and testing the Spirit and making sure that these aren't counterfeit spirits, then I think you're going to be on your path of not being deceived. So don't be concerned if you're not around people who have these gifts as well, because they're not as common as one might think, although there seem to be pockets where more of it occurs. And again, not sure what it is at times, but just understand that for all the saved people, God has special gifts, and you just need to have faith in God that you are doing what you're doing if you have the Spirit in you. And it's that Spirit that you will not only fulfill the law, but you'll also do good works, and you'll continue to bring more people into the fold, no matter what that gift is that God has given you, if you let God lead you.
Amen. Yeah, I'm really glad that you brought it up, that not everyone that is doing these things is actually doing it with the right heart. Because we know when the Messiah returns, many are going to say to him, you know, haven't we cast out demons in your name and prophesied in your name? And he's going to tell them, you know, I never knew you, actually. So, yeah, that's really important. I really just can't stand the thought that people are being led to feel that they aren't saved because they can't speak in tongues, and that there's actually a huge church that's telling people that. You know, it's so unfortunate. So I'm really glad that you were able to answer that and clarify some of probably a lot of the doubts that many of us have had. You know, why, when Joy and I were traveling, why didn't I speak in tongues when I was in Israel, and why couldn't I speak Hebrew perfectly and speak Arabic and all this? But that doesn't mean that we're not saved. You know, that it's just according to His will, and His will is greater than ours. So yeah, I'm glad that you were able to understand that. So I'll go on to our next question, and this seems like one that might come from someone who follows Dr. Joy. Her name is Tammy, and she says, do you think DNA from the Shroud of Turin could play a part in the Antichrist?
Well, it's certainly a possibility. And I think we have to be open to all sorts of possibilities. But also could be a way that perhaps we get some false antichrists, if I can put it that way without having a double negative, because Jesus talks about more than one antichrist. There's antichrists plural, and I think they're going to come from all over the world. So whether or not using DNA from the shroud is how they're going to create antichrist and deceive people by having some sort of pedigree and bloodline that they have as part of that resume for being antichrist. Although I do wonder, though, with DNA, if it's a DNA, unless it's totally hidden and kept from the people, from the shroud, in terms of how they're going to clone this type of individual, how that is going to persuade Christians and or the people of Judah to follow him, because we do know the true Antichrist is going to deceive many, and even the lower Antichrists are going to deceive all. So I look at that as one of those possibilities. Not the lane that I generally go down, but because we don't know how Antichrist is going to come about, we can only look towards Scripture to identify who he is when he does come. And I think there's lots of ways that we can get an Antichrist figure. I like to write about in my book about how the secret societies have bloodlines where they've scioned and grafted in all of these Nephilim bloodlines and the bloodlines from Israel and King Saul and King David, and even to the pedigree there of Mary and Jesus having a child, Josephus, that marries into the dynasties in Celtic England and in Wales, and then crosses over to the Merovingians and creates this bloodline. And people read about that belief system in the Da Vinci Code. That's actually what they believe, by the way. I'm not saying I believe it, but that's another way we could see Antichrist as well. And we could just see something that's created from possibly fallen angels again, or Satan in another violation in the end time as well. So lots of different ways, but this is definitely one of those possibilities. And the way the shroud is always sort of front and center and has the attention of scientists, Christians, Catholics, and from the Gnostics as well, and that in a lot of circles they claim to have the secrets to the shroud, and that they actually created it. So, I mean, lots of different stories on it. What I do know is that I think the shroud is unexplainable, and I personally believe it is the shroud that covered Jesus, but that's just where I fit in on it. And my information only comes from what is out there publicly. So I think we need to be aware of it. So it's a possibility. I guess is the best way to leave it.
All right, thank you for that fantastic answer as always. Please bear with me while I pull up the next question. This one comes from Think Good Thoughts. Are there any connections between early Hinduism and the Jerusalem First Temple period?
Yeah, I don't think so. And the reason why I traditionally say that is you get the First Temple period, and that's in the time of King David and King Solomon, where David takes Jerusalem, and then Solomon's the one who builds the temple. In, depending on your dating, somewhere between 900 and 1000 BC. So typically the Hindu religion, again, comes out of this people that migrate to the Indus Valley, which are the Aryans again, and then they start this Brahmin line of priests and this ruling class, just as they do everywhere else. And so you have that mystical religion in the temple by at least 1,000 years, and by other accounts even before that. And what's interesting though is that these same Aryans, when they came into, as the Marianu, into Mesopotamia, they created Zoroastrianism. And the Parsi, I think, still follows Zoroastrianism and that type of religion. Even to this day, you have similar names of the deities and words and languages that match up quite well with the Hindus and the Hindu religion. Now, this is the religion that would have been, around as a counterfeit, or not a counterfeit, but a counter religion to Judaism, as it's starting to come into its own in the time of Abraham, and then by the time of Israel, which is going to be leaving Egypt circa 1450 BC to 1400, as opposed to the 1200 on secular chronology. But from a biblical dating, that's when they would have left Egypt, and you have this birth of Judaism in huge numbers. And so, again, they don't really line up in terms of, from early Hinduism, but you could have that influence that's coming out of the Middle Eastern countries of Assyria and Babylon and all those other countries, Elam, all part of the same group of peoples and nations in that area that are interconnecting with the temple and Jerusalem at that time. But we don't a lot of that description of that kind of Eastern religion other than in Ezekiel with Tammuz, in the time of the Second Temple, or in the time of the destruction of the First Temple, just before the Second Temple. And you also have the people of Judah traveling to Babylon in exile, where they might even come closer in contact after that. So there's links to the Eastern religions, and also understanding that all of those pantheistic religions are the same religions with just different vernacular names for their gods, some of their rituals, but essentially the same religion that has its same root source. So you could also make an argument that those were the religions that were contaminating the Israelites from the time of their conquest to the time of their punishments for violating the covenant and letting those religions seep in. But as a direct sort of contact from the Hindus, that doesn't seem to match up from a historical concept or from any sort of research that I found that would sort of make a match on that.
That is a very interesting concept, that this is one of those mystical religions that the Israelites struggled with. I never really thought about that, but it's very possible. And to think about the original Hinduism and fallen angel worship, they were involved in some very evil things. It's very interesting to think about. So thank you for that answer. I will go ahead and go to the next question. This comes from Brandon. Is it possible that instead of giants, they could create Nephilim that blend with humans better through DNA manipulation? Maybe they're talking about the end times incursion.
Yeah, I think, if you're looking at creation of Nephilim in the end time, from a DNA perspective, that's a significant possibility. Although I think that the knowledge and the technology was as great as we have today, and likely greater because we're not quite in the end time yet. Although I think we're in the fig tree generation, so that I think before the flood they had a knowledge that they could do DNA manipulation, is what I'm saying, just as what we have now and is continuing to develop. But you also had the original Nephilim, so they may not have wanted, DNA created Nephilim and just let them create other creatures as violations against the laws of creation before the flood. Polytheism lists in great numbers of all these different types of beasts and things. But in the end time, where I think this question is being more focused to, I think that there's a possibility that the Nephilim are created from DNA manipulation in the end time, as one of the possibilities of how we see Nephilim. So if that's the case, unless there's something that is preventing humankind and or the help that they're going to receive from the fallen angels and or the demons to create the Nephilim, in this case through DNA manipulation, unless there's something that is preventing that from heaven, from God, from permitting that, that would be a possibility if you could, if they can actually crack that DNA code to do that. Now, do they have the ability to do that today? I don't think so. I know they have the ability to do all sorts of crazy things with DNA, but you would also have to somehow create new DNA, or you would have to cross-pollinate some DNA to do that. So that means you would either have to have a second incursion, or somewhere backwards engineering some of the descendants of the Nephilim that survived and then enhancing that, or using some old DNA, perhaps from the Shroud, perhaps from Gilgamesh, perhaps from Nimrod, with all the different sort of theories that people have out there where this DNA cross-pollination could come from, perhaps from there. So I don't rule it out. Again, it's not one of my more favored positions in terms of how Nephilim will come about in the end time. But if you do that, then there's no reason why they could not be able to make them more easily capable of blending and reproducing with humankind. But having said that, if you're Nephilim, do you really want to have that kind of hybrid being, or do you just want the world for yourself? So again, I wonder whether or not there'll be a few different conflicts if that were to come about. But certainly, I guess to bring the answer to a close, is it is likely possible, but it's a question of where you get that DNA from, or how you recreate the knowledge to change DNA to add in those things that would create a Nephilim, which is, a significant step from, you're not creating it totally from nothing, but you're creating something from nothing to add in. So that takes knowledge that is perhaps, going to be beyond what we're going to have, but I don't rule it out.
Absolutely. And it's really interesting to see today what's happening in Japan. I'm sure that it's happening in multiple places behind closed doors, but Japan came out recently that they're now mixing human and animal DNA. And to me, that's just so creepy. It makes me just shudder because, as in the days of Noah, it's going to be the same as our day. And it's, all of these murals all over the world, and all the ancient temples of centaurs and, men that have serpent, bottoms. They're all these hybrid beings, and then to think if they really mix animal DNA with humans, are those beings going to be sentient like we are? Are they going to have a human mind with an animal body? It's so weird to think about, but I mean, if we look at the past, it definitely is very interesting to consider.
Well,
So I'll move on to the next question.
especially with creatures.
Okay.
I was going to say, especially with creatures like the chimera, and they're using that term today in terms of that research. So, I mean, it had multiple types of animals involved, and so yeah, I think that's definitely going to be continuing.
All right. The next question comes from Linda, and she asked, "Did Noah have transparent skin? I also heard he had blue blood."
Yeah, so it's one of the things we need to do is always discern where the information is coming from, and then analyze it and see whether or not that makes any sense scripturally, or is it some sort of way of creating a deception in terms of who Noah was. And so typically, I mean, we don't get anything from scripture that talks about blue blood from Noah or transparent skin. So I don't believe that that is a Christian concept. What I do know, though, is that when you look at the polytheist version, as you look at the fallen angels, and then in their spirit form, they are basically a transparent, opalescent, shining being until they actually take a different form of their choice. And so the thought is that would have been passed on to the Nephilim. And typically that, we don't get any accounts of that part being passed on, but you do understand the Nephilim and the Anunnaki, and even in First Enoch, you have Lamech as being a shining being and lining, and Noah thinking he's, a son of the angels, or not Noah, but Methuselah thinking he's a son of an angel. And so that's because the shining beings, although they weren't opalescent and transparent, their eyes shone, and they could actually light up a room with the light from those eyes, according to polytheist accounts. So again, I would say no to the transparent skin. That would be more, as it's understood, being passed on as part of their traits as a polytheist understanding, and in doing so, trying to draft Noah as being a giant. And in many polytheist accounts, they look at Noah as a giant. And they like to transpose, for example, and you get this coming out of education as well, as they start to merge these concepts. You have Pidgeon out of the Epic of Gilgamesh, who is 2/3 God and 1/3 human. Both Pidgeon and Gilgamesh and Enkidu are all 2/3 God and 1/3 human. So they're really overlaying a giant survival story on the Noah account. And they're similar on the macro details, but on the micro details, it's a completely different story. And you get the same thing with Deucalion as being the Greek Noah. Well, he's son of Prometheus, which makes him a Nephilim as well. So again, have to be very, very careful in terms of how there's so many organizations trying to blend the Bible and its accounts into other accounts. Blue blood is an extraordinary term to be used with Noah, because again, that is basically saying that he would be a Nephilim, because in the polytheist accounts, the blue bloods are the bloodlines of the giants. And so when you hear the word pseudo blue bloods, those are the wannabe giants, and they're trying to intermarry and ennoble their bloodlines. And so again, I think that's coming out of more of a polytheist understanding as opposed to a scriptural understanding. And believe me, it is very common, a very common doctrine and understanding in polytheism to draft a Noah or Noah type character as being a giant, just as his sons were giants. And I mean, we all saw that last Noah movie that really did not stick well to scripture, but stuck quite well to the Gnostic and polytheist versions in a lot of aspects. So again, I would equate those terms with the Noah movie, with the same type of how do we blend the two and how do we mislead people. So no, is the simple answer.
Awesome. Thank you for clarifying that. It's definitely interesting to have the insight of the deception that the polytheists are actually buying into, and to know the roots of all of that actually go back to fallen angel worship and Nephilim worship of Nimrod and entities such as him, and the kingship that really took over and enslaved humanity. That's very interesting. Thank you for that insight. I'll move on to the next question. I'm not sure who it was from, but it says, what is the relationship between Og of Bashan and Nimrod? Nimrod, called Hunter of Giants. Does he hunt Og?
Yeah, that's a good question. And if you've ever read anything about the Manichaean Book of Giants, and a piece of that comes out of it is the Lost Book of King Og. It actually talks about the wars between Og and Nimrod, and all of Og's wars and a whole bunch of other different things. And Zen and I did a couple of very, very good shows on that. If people want to go back and look at it, very, very informational. But the bottom line is what we do know about King Og is that he was the last of the Rephaim, with Rapha being the base word and I am being the male plural. And we don't know whether Rapha was an offspring of the fallen angels, or this is the classification for the Rephaim, like the Nephilim are before the flood. But in my understanding of how giants show up after the flood, as I mentioned earlier, I prefer the second incursions. So when we hear of in the accounts of Og in 3 different occasions in the Old Testament where he's called the last of the Rephaim, I think it's referring to him being the last of the original Rephaim that was created after the flood, or on the other version would be the last of the ancient Nephilim who survived the flood. But he's called Rephaim, not Nephilim, which is one of the reasons why I lean towards a second incursion. So if that's the case, then is when did that second incursion happen? And I think that incursion, happened very shortly after the flood, either at Mount Hermon or at Bashan, either at Mount Hermon in Bashan or at Sodom and Gomorrah. So that means that if it happened very quickly after the flood, and Nimrod was 3rd generation after the flood, and he builds Babel Tower after 70 years after the flood, that it is very likely that Og and Nimrod were indeed counterparts. So setting the chronology up certainly makes that as a possible link. And so that would make Og, of course, if he's born that early, of a great age, because when he's still around at the time of the Exodus, then you're talking somebody that's 1,000 years or more, being older. And if he survived the flood, who knows how old? But certainly he lived to be a great age before the Israelites killed him. And so Nimrod, he becomes a Gibberim, a mighty one, and a warrior and a hunter, which are all sort of military sort of terms, and he becomes a tyrant king like Rephaim. And so I think he had to have made his reputation against the giant nations that would have been created shortly after the flood. Otherwise, who would he have made his reputation with? Because as we understand it, only the descendants of Noah and their family, and they're all together, come down from the mountain, and then they build Babel City and Babel Tower. So who are these other people? And we're not told of any wars within the people, because there still is one people. There may have been some sort of coup, as Jewish legends would assert, that Nimrod, has a coup and a mini battle within the peoples to take over as king of Babel. And we're also told in Genesis that he built Babel City. So I don't think that is enough to create that sort of Gibberim and fame that Nimrod had. So I think he had to fight with many of the nations before intermarrying with them after Babel, and that's where he gains his reputation. Now, whether or not that actually involved fighting Og or not, because this was in Shinar, which is a transliteration for Sumer, just as we know Nimrod stayed in Shinar and in the Mesopotamia region, which is Sumer, after Babel. But whether or not he actually fought Og or not, we don't get a scriptural account of that. But again, as I mentioned, you have these Cadmonites that Og may have been also associated with and may have been also one of the procreators of. So one would think that Nimrod and Og likely had to be aware of each other, but I don't have anything that I can point to in my research that say that they actually fought each other. But certainly, I think it's a very good case to make that to have a reputation like Nimrod did, that he likely hunted Rephaim and Rephaim hybrids.
All right, excellent. Thank you for that answer. Our next question, I think this could be the last one, depending on how long it takes, because we will take a break here in about 10 minutes. Make sure you get some water and stay hydrated before we move into our speed round towards the end of the episode. This question comes from Mike. Since the Antichrist would proclaim himself to be the true God, wouldn't this Antichrist figure in turn then need to accuse someone else of being the Antichrist? In other words, will there need to be a fake Antichrist to come before the real Antichrist as an imitation of the storyline in the Bible? Great question.
I think that's a great question, and it fits into a greater thing that I tend to like to talk about, and I'll come back to that in a minute. And so when we look at what Jesus talks about as signs in the end time, as I mentioned earlier, he says there will be antichrists in plural. So there will be many competing antichrists, but there will only be one true antichrist. And what I'd like to talk about in the end time is that everything that they're going to do is a counterfeit. And it's designed to deceive the elect if that were possible. And so you're going to have, a counterfeit religion, and you're going to have, a counterfeit Messiah with Antichrist. And you're going to have a counterfeit Armageddon, which I think is the Gog War, so that you can create the sort of credentials to deceive the elect if that were possible. And that Gog War is the war of Revelation 9, after the abyss is open and all of these beings come out of the abyss, and perhaps one of the angels or one of the beasts that come out is going to actually be helping to lead the Gog War, which I believe is the Revelation 9 war and the Joel 1 and 2 war, as opposed to the Armageddon war. But there's 200 million people described in that war, and that is going to be what everybody thinks is Armageddon, that will actually deceive the elect. And that Antichrist will use, after an overwhelming army is swept away before him, as Daniel describes, and then he moves into the land of the covenant and into the temple and sets himself up as king of the world and the Messiah and the abomination, as the king of Jerusalem after that. And so he will, I think, and getting down to what this question is all about, as part of the counterfeit credentials, now point to that war as him as being Jesus coming back, and who he defeated as the leader of that war being the Antichrist figure. And it's interesting that Gog, as you take that back to Greek, which is 1136, is also a title and a name and an allegory for an Antichrist. And so Gog is also known as a giant in polytheism and in Greek mythology in particular. And he's the son of Iapetus in most accounts. And so is Magog, which is also part of that alliance. Both giants. And so I think there's either going to be some sort of avatar or possession of individuals that are going to lead this alliance of nations in the Gog War that will look like Armageddon, and he will be an Antichrist figure, just as Antichrist, I believe, is also going to be possessed by Azazel, Abaddon, Apollyon, because the son of perdition, as you take that back in Greek, goes back to a series of words with Apollyon that is translated out as perdition, as the son of perdition. And we also know Antichrist is going to have a mortal head wound, which is going to be part of the counterfeit of the resurrection. And that's when I think Azazel, Abaddon, Apollyon is the one who's going to possess Antichrist and then declare himself as the true Messiah who defeated this false Antichrist, if I can use a double negative again on that, as he was more of an, I guess, an Antichrist wannabe, but he will actually make it look like this is Armageddon. He defeats Antichrist, and it's all part of that end time deception that we have to be very, very careful in terms of how we understand Scripture and not get caught into the trap, because there's going to be many Antichrists, and people are going to be saying he's Antichrist, that one's Antichrist. He will be the one that negotiates the covenant in Daniel 9:27, but he won't have come to power yet. So this other figure, even though you got this Antichrist rising, this other figure that's going to be leading this great alliance for this great Armageddon type war will get all of the attention until Antichrist continues to rise, gain fame, then takes credit for winning the battle and is actually crowned as Antichrist at the 3.5-year point of the last 7 years. So I think that's just an awesome question, and all part of that counterfeit aspect that people have to be looking at, because these deceptions will be so great, they will actually deceive the elect if that were possible. And Jesus clearly says they will be deceived. Many of the elect will be deceived.
Absolutely. The layers of the deception are just so deep, that there are many antichrists, but like you said, there's one true son of perdition, one true incarnation of Abaddon, or the false one, literally. So I think right now is a good chance to go ahead.
I was just going to follow up when you mentioned Abaddon, is that Antichrist will honor a god of forces as well. And that is a word that is Hebrew for mouths, and it goes back to a series of words that leads back to words like Azaz and Az, and all goes back to the root words for Azazel as that comes together. And Antichrist is the one who destroys Babylon in Revelation 17 and in Jeremiah 51. And you get the word of destroyer in Jeremiah 51, which goes back to Abad and Abaddon. So Abaddon is a spin-off word that's rooted in Abad for destroyer, which is the title of the two beings in the abyss, both being destroyer, one being Greek with Apollyon and Abaddon being in Hebrew. And this is the god that Antichrist honors as he's rising to power, and then eventually defeats the Gog army, or at least takes credit for it, because God says he's the one who protects Israel in the Gog Wars. So just thought I'd throw that in as well. Wow. As part of that whole counterfeit.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that's an amazing revelation to share with everyone, and definitely a great one to begin our break on. So Gary, if you would like, we'll go ahead and have some water. And I'll start with a couple announcements. First, before we get into the conference trailer, which Gary will be joining us at the conference, I just wanted to give a suggestion that Be Good Bear had shared, and an apology on my end. We just got the second computer screen to help me manage all the different screens and windows and software, the broadcasting software that I have to put up with. But in doing so, for some reason, my computer has slowed down vastly. So every time I try to chat on the YouTube live stream, it goes like one letter every 5 seconds, and then it freezes. So I'm scared to really interact with anything too much. And unfortunately, it seems like the quality of the video that's being put out from what I'm receiving from Gary isn't as good as what I'm actually receiving from him. So I really apologize for the bad quality. I can't say bad quality because I can still hear you, and I think everyone can still hear you. So that's the main point. But hopefully next time I'll have everything figured out better, and we'll be able to have a better show. But I think that it's been great so far. So without apology said, I'll go ahead and move on. We'll just play the trailer real quick. So thank you for joining.
Sacred Word Revealed comes to Atlanta, Georgia on March 27th through 29th, 2020. Purposed to reveal end times mysteries, to prepare the final generation, we must don the full armor of God. Featuring Zen Garcia, Gary Wayne, Stephen and Jana Ben-noon, Dr. Stephen Pidgeon, Justin James Garcia, Dr. Joye Pugh, Rob Skiba, Laurel Austin, buy your tickets now at sacredwordrevealed.com.
All right, so as you saw, we're having a conference here in Atlanta, Georgia, March 27th to 29th. And we did add one more speaker that Zen met at the latest conference that we went to. Nathan Reynolds will be joining us. Very nice person with a very awesome testimony. And we look forward to seeing you all there. You can get your tickets at sacredwordrevealed.com. And just in case everyone isn't clear yet, we are starting on Friday night, technically with the conference, but if you come during the day, we're also doing a Georgia Guidestones tour. So there's only 40 slots available, and I believe close to a quarter of them are already taken up. So please, when you go to sacredwordrevealed.com and you go to purchase your ticket, you can sign up for that Georgia Guidestones tour, and we'll be visiting there to really see some just horrible stone monuments that talk about depopulation, that talk about how the Freemasons really plan on controlling the masses. And it's really, it's something that if you've never seen or never researched, you might not be able to appreciate the grandness of it, but it's something that just going there, seeing, taking a picture with, and sharing that with your friends, just the fact that it says they want to keep the population at 500 million should raise some red flags for those that we've been trying to wake up to these agendas. So we really want to see you at the conference, and we would love to have you join us for the Georgia Guidestone Tour. The next thing that I want to talk about is the Digital Readers Club. We do meet on the Zen Garcia YouTube channel every Saturday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, and we have studied through the Aramaic Targum, the Great Commission 1 and 2, which were the Acts and the Gospels of the Apostles, and now we're in the End Times Apocalypses. So we're currently reading through 2nd Ezra, also known as the 4th book of Ezra, and it's quite an amazing study. I really encourage everyone to join us for the study. We also throw up the recorded video onto this YouTube channel, so you can always watch the recorded video there. But if you want to follow on the live stream, check out the Zen Garcia YouTube channel. It's basically our mirror YouTube channel. But with that said, we'll go ahead and move to the next announcement. This one is just a shout out to all of our patrons. We recently, just a few weeks ago, opened up a Patreon account where you can actually support this ministry. You can help support this video ministry. You can help support all the work that we do at sacredwordpublishing.com. And you can get benefits in return for the donations that you make. So that's patreon.com/sacredwordpublishing. And there are 5 different tiers. You can join there, and we do a weekly summary video with Zen and myself, and we also do a once a month Ask Me Anything with the Garcia family, and it's patron only, so only the patrons can join, and it's basically like a phone call between us all, and we just have a great conversation. But that's on the last Tuesday of every month at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. But you can find out more at patreon.com/sacredwordpublishing. All right, with that said, Gary, how are you doing? All right, let me work through my slow computer and pull up the next question. I think that we just have a few more before we actually get into the live questions. So if you do have a live question in the chat, please feel free to type in all caps, and I'll make sure to get that copied and pasted into the list that we have running of the live questions for tonight, and Gary will be answering those shortly. We just have, it seems, 2 questions left before we actually get into that one, into the live questions. So this question, our second to last, comes from Milford, and they ask, can you tell us more about the scorpions created in the underworld? Do they truly exist outside of this dimension? And what do they do if they exist? Were they created by the one true God, or were they created by fallen angels?
Yeah, very, very good question. And I think who Milford is, what Milford is referring to is probably the scorpion beings that come out of the abyss in the end time. That Abaddon leads, or Apollyon, or Azazel. And so from that premise is where we'll talk a little bit about this, because the abyss is in the underworld where these scorpion beings come from. And they were locked in there, so that means they were created at some point in time, and who created them, and they were also seemingly part of the angelic rebellion and were put into the abyss. And we're going to see these beings come out again in the end time. So it's important to understand who these things are. And some people just think they're the fallen angels. I think there's something maybe perhaps a little bit different, although fallen angels are leading them, and I'll come back around to that in just a second. And you also have sort of these type of weaponry that's being used in that Revelation 9 war, where the abyss narrative is talked about, and it comes at the end of the abyss. So I think there's a relationship to the Revelation 9 war and with the 200 million and Apollyon and all of his minions and fallen angels being released just before that. And so a lot of people think some of these things described in Revelation 9 at the end of that war, and Joel 1 and 2 are more technology, like helicopters and things that can fire things from the tail and stuff like that. Again, that's all a possibility, but it also could be some biological weapons that are intermixed with transhumanism and all sorts of different things to create super warriors and super beasts for war and super technological machines. So it could be some combinations, but taking it now back to the scorpion beings, these things are obviously very, very powerful, and they're going to just be absolutely a horrific terror on the earth, except for the people who have a seal on their forehead. And so I just want to take this a little bit back and give some people some thoughts as to what this might be, because I think we get a lot of answers for prophecy out of prehistory and answers outside the Bible that we can look to, as long as we measure it against the Bible and we're not there to corrupt the Bible. I just want to be clear on that before I get into it. So when you look at that word scorpion, it doesn't really go anywhere when you look at it from a Greek perspective, because it comes from Scorpios. But from the Hebrew perspective, scorpion comes from the word a crab. And that's where things start to get a little bit interesting. That's spelled A-Q-R-A-B. And what's interesting about that when we go into prehistory, and during the rebellion of the angels. And you get certain groups of angels. You get parent gods and you get a second tier god. So just as you have, gods like Tiamat and Anu as being parent gods in the Sumerian pantheon, you would get a similar accounting of, gods like Ra in the Egyptian pantheon, and you have the Osiris gods below in the Greek pantheon. You'd have Kronos and Gaia, and then in the lower gods you have Zeus and Poseidon and those types of gods. So you have that sort of standard that's going on in prehistory, and so understand that that second tier is considered sort of like the lower gods. And when we look into their accounts in terms of the rebellions and the things that are going on in prehistory, and I'm going to take this out of the Sumerian version, where you get some beings that were created by Tiamat to help keep the lower gods in check, that they were always pushing back, and in many accounts actually overthrow the parent gods. And Tiamat is actually killed, and Tiamat's kind of like a Leviathan, Lotan, or Nahor, or type of character. But it's a female goddess, and what she does is she creates a being that's known in a couple different names. One is called a Gurdabalu, and the other one is a Krab Buamalu. And it's that Akrab Buamalu connection that I think might be these gods that were created by Tiamat, these beasts, almost like a godlike Nephilim type of beast. They may be part physical, and again, just some other sort of violations of creation whenever they're created, but they're there to keep the lower gods in check, although they fail. But these had the ability to destroy the earth as they go back in the Akishamaya tradition. But in the Sumerian tradition, they're described as beings with the head and the body and the arms of a man, and the body of a scorpion, bird legs, and with wings that could launch powerful, destructive weaponry depicted some form of arrows coming from bows, and they also stung their prey from a venomous tail. And I think whatever these things that were created in the prehistory, I think they were thrown into the abyss along with Abaddon, Apollyon, Azazel, and all the other worst of the fallen angels and impassioned angels, and are the ones that are going to be coming up out of the abyss afterwards. And then after Tiamat is killed, they're used to protect not only the sun temples, but also the gateways and the passages to the abyss. And I think they do that until the time of the abyss is actually opened. So I think we're going to see them, and I think that's a better answer from my research than the technological aspect. But I do believe we're going to have that technology and bio-animal weapons and transhumanism weapons and fantastic technological weapons as part of that war as well. But I look at these scorpion beings as being probably some sort of creation of the fallen angels before the flood, and we're going to see them again.
Absolutely. It's as Kathy says in the chat room, it's just creepy to really imagine these types of beings coming up out of the abyss, the dead coming back to life, like the whole zombie theme that our generation is crazed about. And then, oh man, I just can't imagine what it's really going to be like. Like, we're so desensitized to things that when we finally see it, we might not actually be surprised. but I still, just thinking about it, it's probably going to be shocking. So I'll move on to the last question that we have on the list for today. And afterwards, we will move into the pretty big list that we've generated so far from the live chat. So if you are in the live chat, please feel free, write your questions in all caps. Be Good Bear, I did get your question as well. I was going to let you know in the chat room, but every time I try to type in there, my computer freezes a little bit. So just let you know over the air, I got your question. This is the last question from the list. It says, from your research, how much of what is going on today stemmed from the Hebrews? Do you know anything about the real political situation now in Israel, since many are saying the Kabbalists are actually worshiping Satan and they are supposedly in charge?
Yeah, so it's a good question, and again, we have to be very, very disciplined in our discernment as to who Israel is, and the visible Judah people who survive after the dispersion of the people of Judah, which is comprises the southern kingdom and more than just one tribe, actually three, possibly some Simeon in there as part of the visible people of Judah. And we also know that there are satanic Jews, and that these satanic Jews are the ones who worship Kabbalism, and in my research, part of the Essenes and several other sects as well. But they're the mystical part of Judaism, the polytheist part of Christian in our religion, and in the Islam religion, it's the Sufis that are the mystical part of Islam. Satanic Jews and those from the temple of Satan for the end time, I think these are the mystical Jews. And they have had a significant influence, obviously, on the Jewish people, but still there's that sort of core Orthodox Jewish people that are still worshiping God and worshiping the Torah and the book of the prophets, and they're not Kabbalists, but there are a significant amount of mystics amongst the Jewish people. And if we follow sort of the history as to how Israel becomes formed as a nation in 1947, it becomes evident that there's an influence from the satanic Jews, and some people might even mix in the Khazarians as part of this mix, but so be it. These ones that aren't the true Jewish people, the true visible remnant, and I'll come to what I'm talking about that in a couple of minutes. But there's a lot of evidence to suggest that they were behind the formation of the nation state of Israel, and so they're not doing it for for Christian or true monotheist Jewish people. They're doing it there to bring on the end time. They want the end time to come about, and they want this rendezvous with destiny, and they want to bring on Antichrist. And so there you have this nation of Israel today, and I think there are two forces there. And I do believe, though, that the Israeli government isn't necessarily a monotheistic driven government. So you get secularism, and you also get this satanic part as well, this polytheist part that sort of meshes in there. But within all of this, there is a remnant of Jewish people, both in Israel and around the world. And these are the people that are talked about in the end time. So people can fake themselves to being Jews if they want. You can have all of these polytheist Jewish people, but there is still a remnant that God will fight for. And these are the Jewish people that when they actually see the abomination at the time of Antichrist being crowned in the temple as Messiah, will recognize Daniel's prophecy, and they will flee to the wilderness, as described also in Revelation 12. And so this is that remnant of people that will be protected by God again from both Antichrist and Satan as they're fleeing, as they're spewing this river that comes from the dragon. And again, I won't go into the complete details of all of that prophecy, but this is the remnant of people that are going to be waiting second Exodus. They're going to be protected in the wilderness, and then there will be a second Exodus that's going to bring all of visible true Judah back to the people who fled Jerusalem at the midpoint of the last 7 years. And it's going to be led by Jesus. And he's also going to lead back all of lost Israel, which are the northern tribes, the northern kingdom, as they will have awakened and they will be led back. And this will all happen in the face of Antichrist. So we need to be very, very aware of all of these different things that are going on, but never lose sight that there is a true visible remnant of Judah that is still there and are still loyal to God and will flee and follow God and recognize Jesus as the one that they pierced at that time. And from the sign in the sky that Jesus depicts after the midpoint of the last 7 years, that is not only for Christians but also for the Jewish people and awakened Israel, that they will recognize who their Messiah is, the one that they've pierced, and they will be led in Exodus to await the finish of the last 3.5 years, and they will be rewarded, because God never forgets his covenant. So he knows who the lost people of Israel are, and he knows who the true people of visible Judah are today, and he will bring them together, as Ezekiel 37 talks about, which is also, you're talking about the zombies, and a lot of people like to use the dead bones as being, a zombie sort of prophecy. That is just God fulfilling his covenant and bringing in a fulfillment of his commitment, all the people of Israel back to life, and they're going to meet up with Judah and Israel, and they're all going to go under the judgment as well. So there's a separate resurrection in there in Ezekiel 37. And as you read on into Ezekiel 37 into about verses 14, I think, where it starts, that's when it starts to talk about second Exodus. And the timing of that follows in Ezekiel 39, which is part of the Gog War of Ezekiel 38 and 39. As you get into that set of prophecies, and in Ezekiel 39, you have again a reference to the second Exodus and the gathering after the Gog War. So all that timing is the second half happening, and Judah will be a very big part of that. And I think we'll also see a better identification of who Judah is when they're permitted to again create the sacrifice on an extremity or a wing of the temple in the first 3.5 years of the last 7. So yes, I think we need to be very, very wary of what is the remnant and who is the remnant and what is left, and to separate that from the ones who claim to be Jewish people who are not, and who are polytheists of Jewish descent, but obviously worship in the temple of Satan.
Awesome, very thorough answer. I like that you mentioned one of my favorite prophecies in Zechariah 12, verse 10. It talks about, that he'll create a mourning in Israel, and they will look on him whom they pierced. And that is the Lord speaking. He says, they will look on me whom they have pierced, and they will mourn for him as one mourns for their only begotten son. And it's such a touching revelation that will occur, and it's amazing. So with that question being our last question, we will now move into the live questions. So are you ready for a speed round, Gary? It's going to be 40 minutes of running.
I am?
All right. You have your jogging shoes on? We're ready to go.
Go ahead.
All right. The first question comes from Spam, and they said, have you ever done any extensive research on the Amish? Very interesting.
Not extensive, but a little bit. And the Amish are a Swiss pacifist movement for the most part that immigrates to North America, as were other similar Germanic pacifist movements like the Mennonites, Hutterites, and there are other variations as well. Even the Doukhobors are a similar type of movement that were come out of Russia, but you have this sort of pacifist movement that is taking place all at around the same time, and that's where the Amish sort of come from. They also have sort of a kin relationship to some of the other religions that in the 1800s comes out of Freemasonry as a mix in there, and also includes the Mormons and Seventh Adventists and a number of other ones that sort of start creating their own scripture and everything, not sort of directly related, but all of them are kind of part of that pacifist movement. So that's sort of how I kind of connect those two kind of parallel arms there. But the thing you have to be very careful of is that a lot of groups in Christianity, they may start off at well, but they can come a little bit more cult-like, and in that whole sort of two lanes of groups that I just talked about, I get a little bit concerned with some of those sort of aspects. But I think there's some very, very good people in there. I think that they need to have that they need to have a little bit more discernment. But I'm not going to write like Mennonites off or Hutterites off or Amish off as not being Christian. They are separated and a little bit cult-like, but I have nothing other than how that is sort of used almost in a little bit of an oppressive nature in so many of those colonies. I still think that they worship the same God that we do and believe in the same as we do, but I do have some concerns about those organizations.
Right on. Joy and I met at one of the conferences that we went to in Ohio, I believe it was, or Michigan. There was a huge community of Amish people that were kind of coming into the truth seeker movement, and they were coming out of the Amish way, but they were some of the nicest, most innocent and authentic people that I've ever met. It's interesting, to just love on all the different members of the body. So thank you for your answer on that. I'll move on to the next one. Oh, I'm getting a unresponsive notification from my YouTube. I hope that everything's working out. It seems like it's still working. Maybe everybody, if you could, let me know in the chat if you can still see this. I think that we should be okay.
So you're really breaking up, Justin, right now. I can't understand.
All right, I apologize for that. I was just trying to make sure that my YouTube was still streaming. I had gotten a notification on my computer that said we were unresponsive, but it seems like we're working. So I'll go ahead and move on to the next question. This comes from Dragon Ball Angel. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, you're coming in good again. So yeah.
Okay, great. I need to just not touch anything on my computer, and then we should stay okay. So this question comes from Dragon Ball Angel. What is your general analysis on the major operations of the 20th century in context of military intelligence, banking, and industrialist crime boss fascists of 1930s through 60s America? If you need me to read that a few more times, I understand.
Well, as I understand it, is what's going on with 20th century military organizations and strategy, banking institutions and strategy, and crime families and organizations. And I guess the implication would be, is there any connections, and are they working together? Is there anything to do with sort of the globalist sort of movement? And I think that's kind of what the question is, as I sort of understood it. So did I miss anything in there, Justin?
I think specifically they were asking about
Okay, I'll take that
just in
as
America,
that's
but
the premise of the question. Yep.
yeah, that's about right.
Okay, well, again, yeah. So, and I don't think it's just in America that, you know, you get these things that are going on. I think it's a worldwide thing, although it's very predominant in the US as being sort of a platform to try and bring about globalization, although they're hitting a few speed bumps as we go in the last 3 years or so. But I think there's a connection there that you have, you know, a military organization that would be hard to separate from the deep state today. And this is a globalist movement with a globalist politicization and globalist agenda. And you have the banking system, which has been basically, you know, owned by wealthy bloodline families, and they set up not only in the U.S., which were the first one comes about. You have the reserve banks, all, you know, owned by bankers like the Warburgs and the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers and on and on and on. And that's where all the Reserve Bank, or in Canada, we'd call the Bank of Canada or the Bank of England, are all set up around the world so that they can take control of the monetary policy. And you have military operations going on to knock off countries like, you know, Afghanistan and other countries, and Iraq was one of them, and they, you know, to make sure that as that war is finished and you come out of it, you have that reserve bank set up in those countries. I think Iran is one of the few ones that are left in the world today, in Cuba, that don't have a reserve bank. So again, you have that sort of globalist agenda going on to make sure that the banking runs all of the countries, to make them subservient, to be able to create that platform for world government. Gangs are just secret societies working sort of the same end to create anarchy and unrest and persecution and horrible things to drive people into the arms of the globalists, because they're the ones who create these organizations, create the problems, and then present the solutions. And so it's part of the whole strategy. And that's why these gangs have, you know, oaths and rituals and all sorts of different things that are just another form of a secret society. And it's modeled after the secret societies related to the gangs that come out of the East. So you have, you know, like the Chinese gangs and stuff. They have basically bloodline members from the Lee family running all of these different triad organizations and things around the world. And so they're all interconnected, and they're all working in the same direction so that they can set up a globalist government. Now, only one's going to be able to dominate. So when we look at, from earlier in the show, all of these different bloodlines of the Antichrist, you're going to see bloodlines that come out of the Shah dynasty, which is the Lee family. You're going to have other family names around the world. But there's only going to be one Antichrist. But directionally, these things are all working in the U.S. to drive the U.S. in the same direction, which is into a globalist position and a lower position in the world. But to be that launching pad in so many ways to sort of gore the nations around the world to continue to move this globalist movement. So I look at it as directionally all working in the same direction. And I know a lot of people might just think that's a conspiracy theory, but when the agendas all sort of match up directionally, then I think you can make that connection that they're working towards a globalist government.
Absolutely. Great answer. Definitely well said, Gary, as Dival Lavid said in the chat. Thank you so much for sharing and really tying it in. I think it's important that we didn't just talk about America, but that you really talk about globalism, because that is the big picture, and that's why we're here, trying to understand the truth of what's really going on. So with that said, I'll move on to the next question that comes from Gypsy. Who are the giants living inside the earth and living on Solomon Islands?
Well, we don't know for sure that we have giants living in the earth today, but it's certainly a possibility. And maybe these are the giants who somehow survived the flood, or they've just were driven underground after the flood, and are the ones that are going to be showing up again in the end time. But I'm not so sure that what the question is, because when we're talking about the Solomon Islands, I mean, we're talking about giants that have a global sort of impression. So when we understand both before the flood and after the flood, giants just weren't in one area. And before the flood, they dominated all the different civilizations around the world. And again, afterwards, I think they ended up usurping all of the royal families, all of the kingships all around the world. And it's their descendants that are those bloodlines running those countries even to this day. So I think, again, we have to look at things as to how they sort of fit with everything that we see going on around the world. And so hopefully I've answered what was being asked there.
All right, thank you very much for that. We'll move on to the next question from Kathy. Are the strange-looking creatures that Google makes related to Nephilim or demons or just AI?
I'm not quite sure what those creatures are that are being referred to, but typically, whether or not they're small little things, and again, I wish I knew exactly what they were. I guess shows you I'm not on the internet as much as maybe I should be in terms of what Google's doing. But typically, they'll create figures, icons, iconology out of their prehistory and their history. So depending on what they're showing, you can have like a 99% bet that whatever it is, it's being derived from something out of their prehistory. So it could be a being of some sort that was created in prehistory, or it could be a religious iconology or something about knowledge or something like that. So it's just totally common place for all of these organizations, and particularly high-tech organizations, to display that iconology. So I wish I knew exactly what those figurines were. I could get a little bit more into detail, but maybe the chat room can forward that.
Yeah, if anybody wants to share a little more of exactly what you're talking about, Kathy, if you're still in the chat, maybe we can come back to that and touch on it a little bit later. But we'll go ahead and move on to the next question. I apologize if I'm saying your name improperly. Dival Lavid asks, where is the remnant of the truth in Christ distinguished from the masses of false Christian Zionists in the world today which worship the beast under the guise of the so-called chosen people?
I would say Scripture and those who follow Scripture. But understand that we live in a world that is governed by the powers that rebelled, and that all the governments, all the systems, all the money, everything is that beast system, and we all are immersed in it, and we are asked to be, not part of that. And the only way that you cannot be part of that is through worship in God. So I think we have to be again a little bit careful in terms of getting a little bit too specific when we in terms of of labeling people and things, when we're all immersed in the same sort of corruptions that are ruling this world. And if not for our Messiah and the resurrection, there would be no hope. So I go back to worship in the Spirit and have faith, and that is where everything is rooted and is apart from all of the corruptions of this world.
All right, thank you for that answer. Kathy said that their website has some creepy, large, and small creatures. High tech for sure. Thank you, Gary. So I guess you answered properly. We'll move on to the next question from Be Good Bear. Will unbelievers be resurrected and live alongside the survivors of great day of the Lord into the millennium age where they can work out their salvation with the knowledge of the true gospel?
No. Clearly, the New Testament is very, very clear on this, that only those who are resurrected before, are, I mean, not even them are spared the judgment, but because they're resurrected before, that their faith has overcome. And of course, that's going to include Israel that I talked about earlier, and also the people who take the mark of the beast, and they're going to rule with Jesus in the end time. Now, not everybody is killed in the time of Armageddon, so there will be survivors outside of Israel and Judah who are going to help repopulate the earth for the millennium period. But all of those unbelievers who were killed, and all of those unbelievers will be killed except for those true believers who survive to the time of Armageddon. They will suffer the first death. And then clearly we're told in Revelation 21 that they will be resurrected in the time of the judgment, and then they will go to the lake of fire after their sentence and will be killed. So no, I don't see any unbelievers surviving into the millennium in any sort of fashion, and to try and salvage salvation. I think that's the judgment time. Everybody's has had the same rules and understanding right from the time of Adam all the way through. And I think that that's the cutoff point. And then we get the rule of Jesus as 1,000 years in direct opposition to the 6,000 years before, starting with Adam. And it's there to lead us into eternity thereafter. So I would even, I'm not even convinced that all the people who live in the millennium and who are born are actually going to be saved, although they'll have no excuses, just as the angels wouldn't have had any excuses. But we're not given a lot of detail about the people who live in the millennium, so I have to be careful not to cross over into speculation. But no, I don't see any verses that suggest that the unbelievers are going to have a chance to earn their salvation. But in the book of Romans, though, it does leave open to the fact that people who haven't heard the word of God will be judged based on what they do and what is in their heart, and what is the law of their heart as to what they believe and the things that they carried out. So I think there's room in the book of Romans that non-believers might be granted salvation. I know that a lot of people don't necessarily agree with that, but I leave it up to God, and I find Romans quite interesting on that aspect when it talks about people who haven't heard the word of God and how he's going to deal with them. So I leave judgment up to God in that respect. But clearly you have to fall into that category to have any chance of salvation for the unbelievers.
Absolutely, yeah. I love that you quoted from Romans there. I believe it's Romans chapter 2 that speaks on that. It's very interesting. The Most High, He is the perfect judge. He is the one that will discern the intentions of our heart. But with that thought, just thinking that, at that millennial reign, the beginning, if that really is that's it for all of the non-believers, those that have denied, how much of a mission-minded heart should we live with? How much should we really be reaching out to our family and those around us and exemplifying the love and the grace that we have received? It's interesting also to think of how the masses are going to be receiving this mark of the beast, and they're going to be worshiping this image of the beast. And for those who reject that, that's going to take a very strong-willed person to reject the temptation that comes with the mark of the beast, whatever is going to happen. But it's interesting also to think about the end of the millennium. Like you said in your answer, there are going to be people that are born in the millennium that aren't saved, and that really hones in on the war of Gog and Magog at the end of the 1,000 years, when the enemy is released for a short season and deceives the nations again. It's very interesting, but I like the way that you answered that. We'll go ahead and move on into the next question. This comes from a very awesomely named individual, Chief Cannonballs. What one world religion do you think will be put in place? Do you think it will be the Talmudist or the New Age movement with hidden hands behind the scenes? And I would add on, do you think it could be Islam?
Yeah, I don't think Islam is going to be the major religion, because it just has not have the ability to win converts in a way other than intimidation. So I don't think that that's going to be the case, and I don't believe that Islam will permit the sacrifice to happen on a wing or an extremity of the temple. So I think it takes a force larger than that to make that happen, and that's a global religion that is the root religion of the world, that rebelled against God before the flood. Restarts at Babel, which is why you have Babylon as that root allegory for this world religion. And the Babylon queen, that's the queen of nations and the queen that rides the empires. And this is the religion of all of those empires as it comes Daniel 2, Daniel 7, and Daniel 8, and then as we see in Revelation 17. So to bring that back to other religions like the Talmudists I think they have a part in it, but you have to understand the religion that is going on with all of these groups is a cosmology that I like to call global Gnosticism. And again, that's probably a little bit too small of a term for it, because it's trying to reunite and is going to be uniting all of the religions of the world under polytheism, as what they believe is the original polytheist religion. And so it's going to be this umbrella religion that allows for the vernacular and local differences and local smaller, lower gods that works underneath. So it's like an umbrella religion. And it's going to cross over and bring in all of the other religions, including Islam, including Christianity, and including Judaism, into this world religion, as sponsored by the covenant that Antichrist negotiates in Daniel 9:27. And it requires this universal religion to bring about world government. So when we look at what we're talking about on all of this, is that you have, obviously there's going to be people, when I talked about Christianity as example, who are going to remain true Christians, and they're going to be persecuted because they're not going to fall for this. But this is the religion that they're going to bring about. And you have the World Council of Churches, along with a Jesuit Pope who's working very hard of crossing over to bring in the polytheist religions and unite all of the monotheist religions under this new religion that is going to be this cosmology that I'm talking about. But the Christian aspect that goes into it is going to be totally perverted by the mystical aspects and the Gnostic moles that are already inside the religion. So I would look for, and I know a lot of people disagree with me, and it's really easy to look at Islam, but I think we're looking too small. We need to look how a religion takes over on a global scale, and it takes this umbrella religion that is going to bring all of these other religions in underneath. And it takes a lot of work and a lot of effort to bring that about, along with catastrophes and false prophets to bring that all about, which we're going to see take place just as the Bible tells us is going to take place. So not to dismiss that these religions aren't going to be part of that religion, because it's part of that cosmology, but again, I would look for something larger.
Awesome, thank you. I feel like we've had a ton of questions about this topic, and we've definitely shared a lot of insight, so thank you very much. I feel like we definitely have a lot of foundation to go on and to study for ourselves, and definitely a lot of the names that you mentioned that I'm not familiar with, I'm going to write those down and mark those for further study. But I'll move on to the next question. This comes from Alex Hammer. And this takes it back a little bit. I think we're going back at least a few hours, maybe a few thousand years here. Cain kills Abel and goes off to marry. Where does his wife come from? Was she from Genesis 1 when God made man and woman and told them to multiply?
It's an excellent question, and a lot of people will try and look at that and say, well, obviously he married one of his sisters. Problem with that is we don't have any sisters being named that he would have been married. All we're told about at that point in time are Abel and Cain. And Cain moves there right away and takes a wife right away and starts building a city. For who? We don't know where the wife comes from, and we don't know why he needs a city. And to a place that's already named Nod, suggesting that there's already people there. We don't get any siblings coming along for Cain until Seth. And then Seth is born when Adam is 130 years old. So we have a time frame from when Abel and Cain first become adults and first start doing their first offerings, where all of this comes about seemingly in a short time frame, where Cain will kill Abel and then leave. So you have a gap of decades there before Seth is even born. And then after Seth is born, there are daughters born after that. So I don't think the chronology lines up for Cain taking a wife from one of the siblings, and why he would marry somebody after being ostracized, because he is being totally expunged from the Cain line and the Sethite line, and he's also given a mark so that people wouldn't kill him. Well, there's nobody else on earth except for Eve and Adam and himself at that some point in time. So who's he afraid of? So it all suggests that there are people there. Now, I do not believe the Bible contradicts itself. So I don't believe that Genesis, but I also don't believe that Genesis 2, when it talks about the Edom account, is talking about the same account as in Genesis 1 and in days 4 through 6, because the accounts are different, and I don't believe the Bible contradicts itself. And so I think that you have two different creations there. You have the people of day 6, and then you have the Adam creation, and then Eve is created later. And that, again, as to who is the person asking the question from the chat room here, is saying, who did she marry? It is Eve. And so it's not Eve. Who did marry? It's from one of the people of day 6. And so I have a handout on this detailing the differences between day 6 people and the Eden account and the Cain conundrum in terms of the wife. I have 2 separate documents on that. If people want to get a hold of me, I can walk you through it step by step in a document, and just email me through my website, and I can send that to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that answer. This could be our last question, coming from Be Good Bear. Is there any chance that science, or science falsely so called, also known as scientism, is the prophesied world religion to come?
Well, that's just another offshoot of that knowledge cult of mysticism. And that's one of the common denominators in the mystical religions, is learning this secret knowledge as you climb up the ziggurat or the pyramid in the various degrees into adept level and higher after that. Scientism offers the same sort of thing. And this is just another Masonic Gnostic organization that is part of that ancient religion. These mystery schools, these mystical religions were around before the flood and again after the flood. So again, I would fold them into that greater cosmology that is coming about. But as you can see with all these different religious names and things that we're talking about throughout the night, that there's quite a number of them that actually have the same belief system. And that's because they all take their religion back to that original religion at Babel and before the flood. And it's a knowledge cult. That's where Gnosis comes from. It's called the tree of Gnosis in their account of Eden, not the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And it's a knowledge cult because they believe immortality and knowledge creates godhood. And they have to provide both so that people can evolve into gods, which is one of the promises they're going to offer in the end time. So that's why you're having all of this technology with cloning and transhumanism and things like that, so they can offer physical bodies for immortality in the end time and their new age, and this knowledge that they're going to provide so that you can be like a god, just as Satan says to Eve in the garden that, surely you won't die, you'll be like God. That is the whole doctrine to these mystical religions that is going to be the common doctrine that's presented in this larger universal religion in the end time.
Excellent answer. And definitely leaves us with time for another great question that comes from Kathy Wynn. She says, I wonder what exactly the mark of the beast is and how will we know? There's so much speculation out there.
Yeah, it's such a great question, and it's still developing. Back in the 80s, 90s, people thought it was the UPC code with the 3 parallel lines in each of those symbols that is not numbered and is 3 6s. Well, that isn't the mark of the beast, but it's probably going to be part of the mark of the beast. And now we have chip technologies and nanobots and things like that that can interact, and the AI aspect that's going to be coming in. So I think all of that's going to go into it, and until it's actually completed and it is the exact time to start implementing it, we won't know exactly what it is, but directionally I think we know what it's going to be. And I think it's going to also be part of that system to try and bring about immortality with that implant. And with the nanobots, I think it's also going to help you connect into this quantum entanglement that has the Atma particle that mixes with particles and works with entanglement to send all the knowledge of the universe everywhere instantaneously that you'll be able to connect into. I also think it'll have an effect on your DNA, and that's one of the reasons why, other than as well as worshiping Satan and the Antichrist, that those who take that mark will go to the lake of fire because it violates the law. They're firmly told who are going into the lake of fire and will burn forever are the rebellious fallen angels who participated in those violations against humanity and rebelled against God and followed Satan. So I think there's a connection there. But the problem is because this is going to be a mix of quantum mechanics and AI and all the different things that it can manifest through that's an implant into the body of some sort. It's still developing, and to say that they're right there right now is a mistake, even though it may be the evolution of that product into its final implementation.
Awesome. Well, it's been a fantastic show. You've given so much research and presented so many concepts here that I'm sure that this is a meal that will last at least 1 month until we meet again for another Ask Me Anything. I want to just touch on one last quick question that Deval Lavid had written in the chat. It said, what about the unaware public that are indoctrinated to believe a lie while the 1% know and abuse the truth? And I have to just point to 2 Thessalonians 2 that says the coming of the lawless one is with all lies, signs and wonders. And it is for this reason that the Most High would actually send them this great delusion that they would believe a lie, all those who don't have a love for the truth. And that is the truth. Those who are really seeking the truth, seeking to know who their Creator is. Revelation 3:20 says, behold, he stands at the door and knocks, and whoever opens into him, he will come into them and sup with them, feast with them. And that is the truth. For those who are truly seeking, I believe that they'll find the truth. And for those who aren't, this great deception is coming for them, unfortunately, but the Most High's will, his plan is far above our understanding. All his ways are above our ways. And with that, I just want to say thank you, Gary, for joining us. Can you let everybody know one more time where they can find your book and how they can support you?
Yes, so you can hold of my book through, the best way is through the Genesis6conspiracy.com. That's Genesis6 with the number 6conspiracy.com. And on there you can link in to buy a autographed copy from myself if you want an autographed copy, or you can link into the Kindle format for digital. You can also link into Amazon.com, Amazon.ca from the website, and into BarnesandNoble.com. It's also available through Bookmasters as a distributor. So if it's not on a shelf in your local store and you want to support the store, they can order it in. That's from Bookmasters. And it's also available on most online bookstores. So lots of ways to get a hold of the book, and best way to get a hold of me, if you have any questions, is to go through the website with the question, or get a hold of me on Facebook under Gary Wayne, and or under Twitter at GaryWayne63, at GaryWayne63.
Yes, I encourage everybody to please give Gary a follow. Please like this video, subscribe to this channel. We really appreciate all of your support, all of the time, the community that we have here. We thank you so much for being humble in the chat, for keeping the peace, for being loving today. It's always good to not have any commotion in the chat room, and especially on a day where I couldn't actually do any moderating because my computer's so slow. So thank you everybody for joining us. We really appreciate all of you. Thank you, Gary. Please follow Gary on Facebook, at least on Twitter. He makes some amazing posts. I love seeing all the pictures that he collects and the research that he presents with it all. It's always a pleasure to read, always a pleasure to study with you, Gary. Thank you for being here again. Would you please just close us in prayer, and then we'll part ways.
Sure. Father in heaven, we thank you for bringing everybody together to congregate and to dig deeper into your word and into the meaning of the word, so that we can fuller appreciate your greatness, fully appreciate why you created us, and take this knowledge to help others learn of you, and to describe to people who are not aware of you the greatness of who you are, the greatness of your love, and to draw them into the family so that their name will not be erased from the book of life. And so I ask you to bless everybody who is here tonight, that they take their knowledge and they lead in this great commission to spread your word and your love to people who may not be ready yet to accept it fully, but will, if hear enough of it, will have enough seeds planted that as things really start to pick up speed in terms of events that are taking place, that they'll be drawn back to you and into your love and into your salvation, and to accept Jesus as their Messiah and Redeemer and Son of God. And so we thank you again, and we ask that you continue to bless and guide everybody who was listening tonight, and all of those who will receive the message of what was said here tonight. And we thank you for allowing this to happen and to blessing us to being able to do so. And we pray all of these things in the name of our Redeemer, the Word Jesus, who sits at your right hand side and testifies to you for us and for all of the saints. And also in the name of the Holy Spirit and your great and holy name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you again for joining us, Gary. And thank you, everybody, for following along. We really appreciate your love and your support. Harbinger said thank you. Kathy said big love, everyone. Love you all. Deval Lavid said thank you, Gary. Susan McCormick gave some hearts. Be good, Bear. Thank you, and may the Father bless you all. Harbinger gives a thumbs up. We really appreciate all of you joining us, and we'll see you next time. Shalom, peace, much love.